Thank you for having me here. I just thought this session is around spirituality and prayer. How do we pray for the long haul, prayer together for community? The last session I did was all about community building for the long haul, and a sense of call in that. And this one is very much about how do we take seriously our own spiritual journey, particularly in places of disappointment and even anger. Where do we go with those in prayer? It's worth saying before I go to the negative stuff, I have had a lot of joys in my ministry. I talked the last session about gratitude, and so I'm incredibly grateful for all that's happened. One quick story just to give you a bit of a sense of those who don't know me, the kind of things we do and the wonderful things that God has done. One of my neighbours, so Clongtoy's a slum of 100,000 people in a square kilometre, and we just sense God's already at work in that slum community. And our role is to go and join and participate and follow what God is doing. And you'll notice those words, those who know Ross Langmead, that was very much Ross. Ross was my PhD supervisor, and very much Ross has had a big influence on the way we approach our world and our mission. I shouldn't have gone down that track. Now I've got to get myself together. Joys, let me get back to that, and it'll help me compose myself. When we moved into Clongtoy, it was overwhelming. It really was. The smells, the sights, the language, the culture. I had dengue fever 4 times. Dysentery, I mean, you kind of name it. It was kind of just one thing after another. But one of the people we met in the early days was a lady called Pooh. And she's a remarkable lady, P-O-O. It was all kind of a bit funny, because what she did, she'd work out the front of her house and she would make food. She was a cook. And everyone in the neighbourhood would go, and for 20 baht, that's like 30 bahts $1, so what's that, 70 cents, something like that, you would get the best fried rice you've ever had. You would get massaman curries. You would get whatever you wanted from a Thai restaurant, you'd get for 70 cents out the front of Pooh's house. And it was great, the name kind of worked as well, so when my mother-in-law would come over, my kids loved it. Omar, we have a Dutch, Omar, so you know Omar's are very stern and very quiet about opinions. And so the kids would say, "Come on, Omar, come on, we're going to have Pooh food." And Omar would go, "What? That's not very Christian, Pooh food." Anyway, Omar does go to New Peninsula Baptist Church. So anyway, I said, "Shh, this is not being recorded, is it?" "Oh, no, it is." I love you, Omar. And so it was all a bit fun. And actually, when visitors came, they genuinely said, "This is the best food we've had. Been to restaurants, hotels. This is really, really good food." But at one point, the price of rice suddenly went through the roof. And it didn't matter how much food Pooh cooked, she couldn't sell it for any more. People's wages didn't go up. And so she was, as a Buddhist person, would make merit at the temple, try and do a whole lot of things to change her luck, change her fortune, but nothing changed. And she got further and further into debt. About the 5-year mark, we'd been there 5 years, and we'd just seen how hard Pooh had worked from 5 in the morning till 9 at night. But if, even that, the harder she worked, the further behind she was getting, because she'd actually lose you on every plate of food after a while. And again, she was kind of hoping it would change. She went to Ange eventually and said, "Look, can you get me a job somewhere? Do you have a friend who I could be a maid?" Something like that. And she said, "No, you're such a good cook. And there were lots of Thai cooking schools for tourists. Why don't you open up a cooking school?" And Pooh said, "Oh, look, my English is not very good." And so Ange worked with her for English. Clongtoy Handicrafts gave her a little bit of a grant to get started. After we had some friends over, she took them to the local market. And the market's crazy. I mean, the market is literally cockroaches for sale and frogs with their guts open, the heart still beating, all that kind of stuff, Tourists loved her, And then she'd take them back to her house and teach them how to cook food. And she's such an outgoing, lovely person. Everyone who meets Pooh just kind of loves her, And so it worked. She got a bit of a grant to get the cooking school going, and Helping Hands Cooking School just took off. It became the number one thing to do on TripAdvisor. Number 2 was the Grand Palace. If you tried to book in for Pooh today, it might take you months to be able to get a spot. It's just incredibly popular. And then a friend of ours, I was speaking at a church, and she came up afterwards, and Shelley said, look, I'm a food photographer for cookbooks. Why don't you do a cookbook? And I thought, that's a good idea. She came over, she totally volunteered her time, and I'm a bit naive about creative things. My design folks and others, I drive them mad because I just think it should happen really quickly, like here's a plate of food, take photograph, next plate of food, take photograph. Cookbooks don't work like that, apparently. And weeks of, and she'd trying to get the light and the colour and everything kind of exactly right. It'd be like 2 plates a day kind of stuff. For weeks this went on. And she took photographs in and around the community. And the cookbook emerged. Cooking with Pooh was the name of the cookbook. And it was a bit of fun, all that, and people were kind of buying it as they went to the cooking school. But then someone put it in the Frankfurt Book Fair, the biggest book fair in the world, and it won an award, the oddest book title of the year. And comedians all around the world picked up on it. Andrew Denton in this country, Jonathan Ross in the UK, Stephen Fry. When BBC did an interview with Pooh, they said, did you know Cooking with Pooh was Googled 25 million times? I assume it's for the cookbook, but it is the internet. You never quite know what people are looking at, I guess. And for me, the joy isn't just the success, because actually that is kind of way out of, in no one's hands, really. But what Pooh has done with that has been amazing. I mean, when people win Tats Lotto here, it nearly always destroys their lives, because suddenly they've all got all this money, the people circle around them, they've never, haven't seen relatives for years, and suddenly they're on the front doorstep and everybody's looking for it. So that could have happened to Pooh very easily. But Pooh met Jesus in the middle of all this, became part of the house church, and her thing, actually, I launched my book, which was Slum Life Rising, and it was out of my PhD thesis. And you want your celebrity chef to come and endorse the book, don't you? So we were at the Foreign Correspondents Press Club, and Pooh was there as one of the panellists. And the first question from the journalist actually went to Pooh. I think my next book is going to be Mission with Pooh. But the first question to Pooh was, look, you're so successful with your book, with your cooking school, you don't have to live in Klongtoy anymore. Why do you stay? That was the first question. And it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, she has kids, she's got family, she could easily kind of cut and run. And she said, well, I used to have to work from 5 a.m. till 9 p.m, and we would, if we didn't do that, we wouldn't eat the next day. So we could never have a day off, we'd never have a holiday. But I'm having holidays now. I have 1 day a week off. And I want to help other people experience that like I have. And so I stay. Actually, her big dream at that point was, could she save enough money to buy a retreat house so that all the workers in the slum, and she particularly felt sorry for our family, could go out of the slum for a bit of space and to sleep and to rest and then be able to come back. And last year, she got to do it. She bought this house with cash to be able to have a wonderful retreat house. Her mum looks after it, and her workers go and rest and then come back. For me, that's some of the biggest joys, isn't it, right there? It's way out of your control, isn't it? You can never orchestrate something like that. You can never. What we're wanting to do is find a cookbook with a funny name and try and find. You can never do it the other way around. But you kind of go with the flow, enjoy the joys that happen. And there are psalms that are kind of like that, aren't they? All the way the world should be is kind of, God is in his heaven and everything is kind of working. Brueggemann calls them psalms of orientation. Walter Brueggemann. But what I want to concentrate on is also the psalms of disorientation, the psalms of lament, when things don't work out the way we plan, where it's tough. Before I do that, I do want to show a quick video clip of just to give you a little bit of context of where we're from. This was on the Late Line show, on ABC. Zoe Daniels did a report on us, and it just gives you a little bit of the context that I'm in, and I don't want to talk about where do we go with our disappointments.
Well, an Australian-run soccer program is keeping kids off drugs and away from crime in Bangkok's most notorious slum. Children in Klong Toi are commonly exposed to family violence, alcohol abuse and drug dealing, all of which are rampant in the slum, where about 100,000 people live in an area covering just 2 square kilometres. Southeast Asia correspondent Zoe Daniel reports.
In the tough streets of Klong Toi, there's no grass. But that doesn't stop these children from playing soccer. They're used to doing things hard. The club sees about 100 children a day who emerge from their homes in the slum to play each afternoon. It was started by Ash Barker, who founded the Melbourne charity Urban Neighbours of Hope before he moved to Bangkok with his own family. They live in Klong Toi, witnessing the day-to-day of slum life.
Where we live in our house, every night you hear the fights, and they're the fights over turf, they're turf wars. I mean, you're talking guns, you're talking knives and samurai sword fights. There's yelling, there's screaming all the time. And so that's got worse this year. We've been here 10 years, and certainly this year has been the worst of it.
Children here are seriously vulnerable to abuse. They're frequently exposed to alcohol and drug use, and sometimes caught up in the drug trade. The soccer club is funded with donations and helped out with equipment and uniforms from unlikely places. These second-hand jumpers were given by the AFL's Auskick program.
It's building people's strength and capacity and health to be able to cope with all that they're faced with. So while a lot of people don't get how important it is, a lot of Australians do, and a lot of Australians understand, I think, why sport can help people stay, young people stay out of courts and out of jails and out of drugs.
They learn here about unity and having discipline, which some kids don't have at all at home. They're trained in how to be disciplined. They're also taught to love each other and to help each other.
Life has always been tough here, but like all big Asian cities, Bangkok is growing. Worldwide, more people now live in urban environments than rural areas, and about 1 billion are slum dwellers. Income pressure leads to illicit activity, and here that's being fed by the drug trade, particularly with methamphetamine being sold on the streets. The coach takes me to see 84-year-old Auntie Amina, who lost her own son to meth use and has been taking a community approach to policing ever since.
We can't order them not to sell drugs. We only work with police to arrest them. The users will be sent to rehab and the dealers will be taken by police.
She says young men are the most commonly addicted in the slum, and that's because many have grown up with parents who are dealers and have used them as couriers from a young age.
Men mostly go out, not like women who stay at home more, but men will get around. And the men are addicted to drugs mostly because their parents are dealers. The ones with parents who are not dealers are not addicted.
A night spent in Klong Toi gives an inkling of what children are exposed to. As well as alcohol and drug abuse, glue sniffing is extremely common. It's partly driven by boredom and peer pressure. 17-year-old Benz was addicted to sniffing glue before he took up soccer at the club.
I was addicted to it for 3 years. Then a group of friends asked me to play football. I did, and I enjoyed it. I like it. So I come and play every day and have changed from sniffing glue to playing football instead.
He's now one of the oldest here. Most of his friends are in jail.
They like to sniff glue at night, and they were all arrested by police. Now there's only the younger group still here. I told them to stop, but they still kept doing it. In the end, they were all arrested by police.
The frightening thing is the kids who don't come to training today, we were really worried about them because they're being picked off by organised crime and mafia and drugs and glue and methamphetamine. So, if they're not here, they're getting in real trouble. They're really at risk of horrible things happening to them.
This gives these kids another place to be. Zoe Daniel, Lateline.
There is a lot to lament in a place like Clontoy because life is so vulnerable. Remember one day I woke up in my little house. Our house in those days was about the size of 4 double beds, and I could smell the smoke. Ange wasn't with me and wasn't there. I kind of felt for her and she wasn't there. And all the electricity goes off whenever there's a fire. So I knew there was a fire, but we've got no windows in our house. And so I was disorientated and couldn't find the door, and got to the fridge and knew that the door was just in front of me. And then Ange opened the door, light bursts in, and she looks at me there and says, "Ash, it's a fire. This is no time to eat." Tragedy around fires, and you can imagine in a place like that, once a fire gets hold, it just devastates the whole community, and it affects the ones who are most vulnerable. A very common experience in Clontoy is if you have a disability, people believe you've done something terrible to deserve it. It's your karma, it's your fate, it's your wengam, as Tai would. And so children with disabilities, Down syndrome and others, are really kind of seen as a curse. They've done something, I've done something to have a kid like that. And there's often not the resources, there's not the understanding of what's going on. And so quite often, children with Down syndrome are given to grandparents to look after. There's no pension, of course. So they have to go out and work. They haven't got money for a special school for these kids. And so they tie them up to their beds during the day, go off to work and come back. Remember one day a fire came through, people ran for everywhere, and a little boy was burnt to death, tied to his bed. I cannot think of a more horrible way to die, but I also can't think of a more horrible way to live, to be treated like that. Not only to have a disability, but to be understood as a curse and to live a lot of your life literally tied to bed and locked into a house. And this was a kid we didn't even know was living. This is just a few doors down from us, but such was the fear, such was the shame associated with this child that we didn't even know that kid was existing. Where do we go with disappointment? That's an extreme thing, I know, but all of us have these disappointments, these things. God, it should be different to that. Psalms have become a wonderful comfort for me in this. And, initially, not just as a kind of therapeutic thing, although I'm sure it is that as well, but actually helping me process and helping me find my anger and disappointment. Because actually, if I'm honest with you, some people say, you've seen so many horrible things over the time in Clontoy. Aren't you angry at God? And actually, that's probably not my biggest problem. We're going to read some Psalms in a minute. That being angry with God is quite all right. He's big enough to cope with it. A bigger problem is becoming numb, not feeling anything anymore. Of seeing just another kid with AIDS die, just see another person who's suffering and no longer feel the humanity of the situation, but just kind of go into, I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong. No, here we go. Of the situation. And so both anger and both numbness, all those kind of things, have to be processed somehow. Richard Rohr says that which is not transformed gets transmitted. That which is not transformed gets transmitted. And I think after a while we can accumulate anger and disappointment to such a degree there's nowhere for it to go. We're in trouble. I do want to read out a psalm that has just become really helpful for me to pray. Not only when disaster like that happens, but it's Psalm 13. It's also disappointment often with myself. I should be a better person than that. A team member letting you down. I guess our situation is just so extreme that when that happens, the consequences are higher. But actually, it's something in all of us at some point. Where do we go with a disappointment? Psalm 13, I think, is one of the classic prayers of lament when things aren't going the way they should. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed, and my foes will rejoice because I am shaken. Don't you get the feeling of this psalm? But an amazing thing happens when we enter into our own, and honest and not in denial about how we feel, not pretending that it's okay, that God meets us. There is a kind of mystery, I think, in the psalm. So as we lament, God joins our lament. God is more angry that that young boy died incinerated like that than I am. God's furious about it. It's preventable. It was unnecessary. And when I join in, actually I join in the heartbeat of God, and something mystical happens with my anger. It no longer is a transmitted thing, but it gets transformed. And God uses it. And even in this psalm, Psalm 5 and 6, but I will trust in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. A couple of years ago, I went on a men's rites of passage in Scotland. Has anyone heard of the men's rites of passage before? Is that familiar? A couple of people know of it. The idea is that in Western culture, we've lost our ability to help boys to become men. In traditional societies, there are the rites of passage that young boys go off to the desert, they go off to different places and come back men. And they learn those kind of life lessons, that life is hard, that you're going to die, that you're not in control, that you're not the center of the universe, that life isn't just about you, you're about life. You know, those kind of big life lessons. And consequently, in Western culture, we have 50-year-old boys who are not taking responsibility, not taking initiative, sitting back and just absorbing, and becoming sicker, actually. And so Richard Rohr, is that name familiar with folks? Richard Rohr and a number of others had been noticing this, and a movement of trying to, this is not about men versus women, this is about boys becoming men. So this is not there is some men's movement that just sounds very scary to me. So this is not that kind. This is about boys becoming men, growing up to maturity. And that with anthropologists and a lot of other people, they've helped initiate, develop a new kind of men's rites of passage, particularly for Western men. So I did one in Scotland, there is one in Brisbane. A number of our guys came back totally transformed by the experience. It's 5 days, it's camping, different themes each of the 5 days. One of the days was called a day of grief. And imagine, I'm in Scotland, just outside of Perth in Scotland. It's freezing cold. So you imagine we're in the hills, the glen, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it's a day of grief. As men, we'd have quiet times by ourselves, silence together, the number of exercises. Someone would talk about the theme, talk about from experience the theme, and then there'd often be an exercise that we did. I will hopefully won't spoil the exercise for those who do it. There is some prize elements sometimes that help people, but basically the exercise was, and I didn't know how it would go. I mean, there's about 80 men, some who are Christian, some are not, all in this kind of thing together, and you just don't know how it's going to go, you know, because it's really demanding, you know, personally. And this one exercise in the tent. They had all the men sit at seats on the outside of inside the tent, but against the edge of the tent. And we said, when you feel something coming up that we've accumulated this anger and disappointment, I want you just to speak it out. What are you mad about? What are you angry about? What are you disappointed about? And just at the top of your lungs, put it out there. Second group, there's a circle, and I just want you to walk around the circle. And there's drums, and there's rocks, and there's all kinds of things. I just want you to make as much noise as you can with them. And then in the inner circle, there is a place for wailing and sackcloth and ashes. And if you feel comfortable, go and do that. No speaking of words in the inner two, just express it. Now, I've been running youth group stuff and exercises. I honestly thought this is going to be a 10-minute exercise. It's going to be really embarrassing. No one will get into it. Little did I know how much came out. I mean, 3 hours later, the noise was just deafening because there was just so much us as men had absorbed and hadn't gone anywhere, you know. I think in leadership particularly, because we're working with volunteers, we constantly absorb stuff to make sure the mission kind of happens, don't we? Put up with a whole lot of stuff. And we just absorb it. It's got to go somewhere. That day, the cork went out the bottle. And for me personally, I realised, whoa, there's something incredibly dangerous happening in me that needs further help. And so those kind of psalms became a really important part of my life. It is interesting. This is not just about kind of therapy as in you express it and then it's out. Actually, it is different to that. This is a kind of resurrection happens. A kind of giving it to God who takes it and makes it something that gets redeemed. Our anger, our disappointment gets redeemed, gets resurrected in a different kind of way. This is a butchering initiation rites ceremony. And any anthropologists among us? Good. You won't be offended. That's good. Rites of passage look like this, and there is some ideals that we have about life. And as I say, there are psalms like that. I mean, you look at Psalm 8. O Lord, how sovereign, how majestic is your name over all the earth. You've set in your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you've found a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemies, the avenger. I mean, these kind of psalms are saying the way it ought to be. And I think we've got to start there. I think we actually do a disservice to ourselves if we forget to have ideals. We get to have the way things ought to be. But this is Brueggemann's stuff. These are the psalms of orientation, ideals. But then there are ordeals. And these psalms of lament, these psalms of disorientation, really do shake us. And as we give them to God, there is a new deal. There is a reorientation. There is a resurrection. And we become different people, actually, than when we began. This is just not naive idealism anymore. It's true hope. It's interesting, in the Psalms, you often see these Psalms kind of go into these pits and then they come out. Psalm 9, 16 goes to this: For the needy shall not always be forgotten, nor the hope of the poor perish forever. Rise up, O Lord. Do not let mortals prevail. Let nations be judged before you. Put them in fear, O Lord. Let the nations know that they're only human. Interesting, the word hope there in verse 18, the hope of the poor. It is, Hebrew language is beautiful language, and it's very physical language. Literally, that word is tikwa. And in other places, it's literally translated rope. You know, where Rahab the prostitute hides the spies and lets the spies out through the window, and the deal is, if I let you escape, when you come, you'll save me and my family. And they do. And Israel sack Jericho. They see these red ropes, and Rahab is there and her family is saved. Well, the word for hope, tikwa, is used there as it is here, but in a different way. It's used literally as rope. There is a kind, and the metaphor really is a pulling forward the good that God intends for the world. That's what the metaphor is being used, the pulling forward of the good things God has for the world. That's what hope is. It's not naivism. It's not just positivism. It's not just wishing things would get better. It is an active, risky, gutsy thing to hope and to pull forward, to be involved in pulling forward the good future that God has for us. So my experiences in all this is that sometimes it's actually good to write our own psalms, to express what's on our heart. Sometimes I do this just because my mind can get so busy. I don't know what your minds are like in prayer. Sometimes I'm thinking about money, I'm thinking about stresses, I'm thinking about what am I going to preach on. And the Buddhists have a great word, they call it the monkey mind. Your mind's like jumping around, banging on the bongos like a chimpanzee, in your mind. And so I found it helpful to have some stillness and some quiet, and then physically write out some psalms, my own psalms. So I wonder if we could try that. Let me just read out my psalm that I did recently, and it was around the fire. And then I want you to have some silence. Everyone happy to participate and write your own. Beauty of Hebrew poetry is a lot of it is poetic parallelism, which basically means you're saying the same thing in a slightly different way. So it's not rhyming, but the rhythm is a kind of parallelism, they call it. You'll get the hang of it, as you probably would have seen it, but this is my one. Lord my God, King of all creation, where are you when the fires start? Why is it the most vulnerable get burnt most? The ones hidden away, incinerated. The rich ones are far away. They are insulated from the burning. Come and bring change. See and do not turn away. Let justice come. Let resurrection change everything. If we could just have some silence, and then just on your own there, write your psalms, your disappointments. Give them to God, because He will resurrect them. He will transform them. And the danger is if we don't, actually, we just do damage to ourselves, become cranky and grumpy, and we become the people we would not want to be. Lord, help us express these psalms of lament from our own hearts. Help us, Lord, to be still and quiet and listen to those things that have made us angry, those things that have disappointed us, and use them, Lord. Help us express them with everything we have, Lord, for these psalms are good. How did you find that exercise? How did you find it? Some of you are still going. It's okay. Is anyone who has finished would like to just tell us how they experienced the exercise? Okay. No? Yeah. No? Okay.
My voice is too loud. I think I experienced that spirituality that Jesus has found in our writings. Because you feel the quietness, you feel the presence of Him as you imagine things. And it just could thoroughly come into your mind, the beautiful things that Jesus shared to us. Yet, I'm so sorry that not all of us valued and appreciate His coming to the world. Thank you.
Anybody else like to share how they experienced it? If anyone would like to share their prayer, their psalm. Yeah.
I thought writing it is very liberating, and so here's my psalm. Don't listen. Lord, you have called us out of darkness. Into your light we reap salvation. You formed us into your body for nurture, for action, for your glory. But we eat ourselves from within, cannibalizing and consuming our own for pride, for greed, and for power. Heal your body, O Lord, and may your life rejuvenate our own decaying souls. And let your servant free to soar once more out of the snake pit, out of darkness into your light. Yeah, I thought that was liberating. Thank you.
Wow, what a powerful psalm. Anyone else like to? Well, it's a bit hard now. You've done such powerful. Who wants to go next? Would anyone else like to share? Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I've got a man at the moment that's dying in our church, and I just popped in to see him this morning again. It's just, and when you said, what am I upset or angry about, I couldn't think until I started writing the psalm. O Lord my God, you are majestic and your name is renowned. You still the waters and you cause the rain to fall. You meet your creation in beauty and in sorrow. Birds are born and birds die, empty nests and cracked eggs. The rhythms of life go on ceaselessly and we are still to be known. Lord, why is Jim suffering still? Hear the prayers of your loved ones. Do not turn your ear against our sighs. Restore your beloved or take him to eternity with you. For you are God and you are our beloved.
Wonderful. I'd like to share this. Yeah.
Okay. O Lord, I know you are great and powerful, that you are the creator of a vast universe of which we know so little. And not only the creator, but the sustainer also. You keep it going. Without your hand, it would disintegrate. And yet you know and remember me. You have formed me, given me life. You say you are my Father. How I wish you to reveal yourself to my human senses. I long to see you, to hear you, to touch you. How I wish you would reveal yourself afresh in human form.
Wow.
O Lord, I am tired. Thank you for the gift of sleep. I will rest under your wings. I will rest in green pastures and wander near cool waters. Thank you for quietness, O God of great love and tenderness.
Thank you.
O God above the heavens and the earth, God most high, where are you in the midst of darkness? Where are you when I call your name? Sickness plagues this earth and it claims the lives of so many. Some of it can be healed, but that which can't takes its toll. It wears you down. It claims your happiness and your joy. The way you see the world changes. The words I speak claim that you are Lord, that you are my God most high. But my heart may not always agree, and my mind is split in two. The battle that rages on continues. Your servant is in need. needs you to carry me through the storm.
Thank you. Yeah, one more. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashley. I won't read my psalm, but maybe just to share the experience. So I chose to write on something very important to me and a pain in someone else's life that I feel something about. I was actually quite surprised that as I started to put those words down in a psalm mimicking biblical language, I found my emotions growing much larger than I expected, so that's a bit of a surprise for me. And I actually found myself experiencing something of a sense that it wasn't wrong to have these feelings. So as if God was joining this, almost a sense of God saying, yeah, I feel that too about that person, and I'm glad you're catching up with me as to what I feel about that pain and that circumstance, which is not right. And I have to confess that's a sort of a new emotional journey.
Thank you. Anybody else like to share either that was really good, to share their experience or to share themselves?
Great. I didn't write, but I was just praying in my head, but I think mine is more of a thanking God for the answer to a prayer. You know, I've been praying for this one thing, and it's been years. And I think as I was thinking about it, I just kept on remembering how many times I used to pray and tell God off. You know, like, why are you holding this back, or why don't you make it happen? And maybe sometimes accusing Him, but then thinking to myself, I'm sorry. Because now that it's happened, I can see why you took so long. It was just, I can see that it's fantastic, it's great. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me pray, and then we'll just have some Q&A if you'd like around that. Lord, I thank you for these things that are on our heart. Thank you that you're a God who doesn't take offence at our struggles, in fact joins them. Help us, Lord, to express with maturity, really, the letting go of those things that are eating away. Lord, we don't want to be those grumpy old people. We want to be liberated people. Free emotionally, free spiritually, free physically, to live the kind of life you want us to live, and to love those people around us with all our heart. Thank you, Lord, for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. I wonder if you want to have some Q&A, or we can finish early if you want to. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Do you use this in any grief work? I'm just wondering.
It does. So the question was, can you use this in grief work? And I think yes. I think the answer is yes. I think the Psalms was a wonderful kind of work. Now, this isn't in a substitute instead of a psychologist or help or counsel. This is all part of what God does, though. Excellent. Yeah.
Talking about, it's just amazing to see the whole soccer tonight.
Yeah.
From South America.
Excellent. Yeah.
Sorry, no footy.
The real football. Only the pagans call it soccer.
Yeah, I know. But no, it's amazing to see what the work that's being done. By the way, I love the victory talk that you had. The interview.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what are you doing now then? Are you still working? I don't remember if I heard that. Or are you
Sure.
now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So basically after 12 years, we really sensed that God was moving us into a different season. So we're back here for a furlough for 6 months. The work continues on in Klong Toi and I'm actually stepping out of Urban Neighbours of Hope as well. Ange and Aidan are still there, like they arrive on Wednesday. So this has been a bit of a transitional time for me. And my daughter's doing year 12 here in Melbourne, so we're kind of here with her till the end of exams. who was here in the session before? I just don't want to repeat a couple of people, so maybe I'll just try to very quickly summarise. Basically, we have a centre called the Birmingham. We'll be working with Springdale College, setting up a master's program, but also working in an estate called Winston Green, and yeah, we'll be working there as of November. So a whole family goes across for that. Sure.
Why are we afraid to express our anger to God?
Yeah.
We see such evil and
Yes.
suffering
Yeah. The question is, why do we feel afraid to share our emotion and our anger, disappointment? It's a really good question, because actually, when you look at our church services, by and large, we don't pray those kind of psalms. We don't sing those kind of songs. I mean, and I think part of it is a Western kind of private thing. That we try to, emotions are not something we want to express out. We don't want to embarrass ourselves or whatever. I think that's part of the Western individualised strong self. So I think that's part of it. But I also think there is tradition as well. We haven't got a tradition of lament. We kind of don't, it's not kind of given space to why, even our funerals. I mean, go to a funeral and so often the casket's closed. They talk about the person as if you don't kind of recognise them sometimes. But in other cultures, you keep the cask open and you talk to the body. You know, you're really expressing what you feel, you know, to the person. And so I think some of it's Western culture stuff, some of it's tradition. I would love our songwriters to take some of these Psalms of Lament and put them out there. I mean, I love the Psalms of Orientation. They're good too. But sometimes it just feels like, we don't give permission to be honest with ourselves, and we go into denial. Yeah.
Pick up on the same question.
Yeah.
I think generally we think of anger as a sin.
Yes.
And usually it is, because we're usually angry about what's happened to me. You know,
Sure.
I didn't deserve this, and you did the wrong thing by me.
Sure.
So probably 90% of it, even 99% of the time, we get angry in defence of ourselves.
Yes.
Whereas there are occasions in Scripture, you know, to be angry and sin not.
Yes.
And Jesus was angry.
Yes.
In the honour of his Father. So there is a place for righteous anger.
Yes.
But most of our anger is unrighteous.
Yes.
And that's why we tend to,
Yes.
try and shut it out.
Yes, although it is interesting what we do when the anger rises, because often we just, that's bad, we'll just kind of push it down. It still has to go somewhere, even unrighteous anger. And I think giving it to God is the best place. And expressing it to God, because God is big enough to cope with it. Our spouse, our children, those around who get the kind of the second-hand anger, the cranky stuff, it's not fair for them to express it. So I think it is right, even unrighteous anger. We're not really sure of our motivation, we just know we're disappointed in anger, that we should give it to God anyway and allow God to cope with it. And actually, as we do that, we become free ourselves. So I don't think it's a sin to express our anger to God and our disappointment. And even if it's about ourselves, and even if it is Richard Rohr has some good stuff, and Merton as well, around the true self and false self. His argument is that the true self is never offended. And the kind of anger stuff is not the true self getting angry, it's a false self. We put an image out of what we're supposed to be like. And when people don't agree with that image, we get offended. Think about last time you were offended by somebody. So it may, this is Rohr's argument, that only if the false self is offended. You're this or you're that, is not who we really are. Who we really are is in God, and then it's unoffendable. So I think there's some of that, the anger stuff is tied with the false self. And as we let it out, we can come make fun of our false self. Ash, you're always thinking you're this or you're that, and letting go of the false self. So I think there's even a challenge in there there is a safe place to express that stuff to God. Maybe not publicly, and I did a similar exercise with a group of missionaries in Thailand. It was a mixed group, and the New Friars group. So it's servants to ages urban poor, servant partners, Word Made Flesh, a whole lot of these groups would come together, and they wanted me to do some stuff on lament, Psalms of Lament. And so I actually got them to do the exercise. I wouldn't do it again because the men got so into it, but the women really got scared. I mean, it was for the men, but incredibly liberating. But for the women in the group, it just whoa! It was good for them to see, I guess, in the sense of what actually goes on in men's minds. But it was scary. I mean, it really scared some people. So I probably wouldn't do it as a public thing, but I think as a private thing to God, giving Him even our unrighteous anger is good, and God can use it. I mean, some of the Psalms we read, I mean, literally it's talking about killing babies and all this. I mean, they're pretty extreme, some of the Psalms, So God can cope with our unrighteous anger, I guess what I'm saying. But you're right, there is, when it's unrighteous and about ego and all that kind of stuff, that's where it's wrong. Yeah.
Something you said just reminded me that maybe there's also a place for humour.
Yes.
The unseating the ego that we put up
Yes.
there. And Jesus is pretty good at using humour, I think.
Yes.
And maybe if we could help each other in that.
Yes.
To laugh at ourselves and to laugh at others, but in
Yes.
affection.
Yes.
To unseat some of that unhealthy ego.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know how you express that in a psalm, but...
No. But it is good because we are, and so one of the tricks I think is identifying when the false self is getting in the way and making fun of it, and the sense of humour that we have with ourselves and one another is really important, I think. When we take ourselves too seriously, that's when we actually get ourselves into knots, But when we have a light sense of ourselves, we can, things don't go away, it's not devastating for us. And the ego is kind of kept in who we really are, the true self. Now, Richard Rohr would go to the false self isn't the bad self. It's just not who we really are. And so I think making fun of the false self is a really good way of going about it. Guys, we might stop there. I'm really thankful for people stepping out in faith with me in this, and I really appreciate the Psalms that came out were incredibly powerful for me. You never quite know how a group is going to go. Many of you don't know each other, and so you're incredibly brave. And I'm incredibly grateful that you stood up and experienced. Lord, I just thank you for this group and for whatever anger and disappointment it is around people experiencing. Lord, I pray that we would keep giving it to you. We wouldn't hang on to it. We wouldn't try and push it down, but you'd redeem it. In your name, amen. Thanks, friends.